Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for June 14th, 2021, recorded around 2:10 p.m. Eastern Time. We have a lot to talk about today, including the potential for one or two tropical storms here in the Atlantic Basin, maybe even a third in the next 5 days. We'll talk about that now coming up. Taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, boy, do we have a lot for June the 14th. We have a very strong tropical wave coming off of Africa right now. And this now is worth mentioning as development chances have officially been posted by the National Hurricane Center. And I do believe that they are higher than what is given right now. I do think that development chances will begin to increase for this tropical wave, which will likely be designated Invest Area 94L sometime within the next day or two, I believe. We have Tropical Depression 2, which formed from a non-tropical low pressure area that we talked about yesterday. And this has now acquired tropical characteristics and is now a tropical depression. There is a warm front to the north of this, but it seems like it has detached itself and now become a fully tropical entity. And this will become Tropical Storm Bill likely by later tonight, and then be moving off towards the north and east. And then we also have Invest Area 92L, currently disorganized, but a high chance for development into at least a tropical depression or storm over the next 5 days as it moves slowly northward this upcoming week towards somewhere along the central Gulf Coast, central and western Gulf Coast states. So anywhere from Texas to Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, the Florida Panhandle certainly could see adverse impacts from 92L. Looking here at the Gulf waters, this is just something I found interesting. Again, this is the actual sea surface temperatures updated as of yesterday, June the 13th. We notice that now most of the area is running above the long-term average with the exception of just this very small cool eddy right here. Everywhere else sitting roughly at about 28 Celsius or higher. So this area will be plenty warm for tropical development over the next several days as the system begins to move slowly northward. Again, somewhere along the central Gulf Coast, I think we're starting to narrow down really anywhere from Texas to central and eastern Louisiana could be dealing with the impacts from this. Again, not really sure exactly on specifics and timing and everything, but it does look like that Father's Day weekend, or really this upcoming weekend, which I believe is Father's Day weekend. This will definitely have some adverse impacts to the region. Storm surge, potentially 2 to 3 feet, gusty winds, heavy rainfall, the kind of whole ordeal there. And in the northern Atlantic, where we're watching Tropical Depression 2 right now, water temperatures are fairly warm across this area because this is the Gulf Stream, and this will be moving kind of like this over the next day or two. And again, it's moving at about 21 miles an hour right now, expected to become a brief-lived tropical storm somewhere in this vicinity tonight into tomorrow. And eventually it will find itself weakening in the cooler waters up here in the North Atlantic Basin. Now, looking here at the upper ocean heat content maps, last updated as of this morning, again, what we're really looking for here is particularly these lighter blue colors onwards into the warmer colors, especially the oranges and the reds. The further you go toward the right of the scale, the warmer the colors get and the higher upper ocean heat content. And this matters because, like we've talked about, tropical cyclones upwell cooler water as they move across an area of ocean. And in this case, if you have high upper ocean heat content, it only upwells the warmer water at the depth. So you don't actually choke off the storm, you actually keep feeding it. And what we've noticed is that over the last several days or so, and we'll talk about the main development region here in a moment, but what we've noticed here is that this area has definitely come up in terms of the upper ocean heat content. This warmer water that's now starting to fill in across here with 28, 29 Celsius, that will definitely add fuel to the fire. And because we have a fairly decent amount of upper ocean heat content that is just kind of sitting in here, I do believe that we are probably keen on seeing at least a tropical depression or maybe even a weaker tropical storm, maybe in terms of, 45, maybe 40 to 45 knots that moves somewhere in the western Gulf of Mexico over the next several days. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. The central and eastern Gulf, though, we notice that this big warm eddy that's kind of in through here with a decently high upper ocean heat content, this kind of warm pool that's now stretched into the Gulf of Mexico. This is definitely interesting if you get any storms to kind of come up through here, or something like that. They enter into this warm eddy. That's certainly something that, has to be taken note of. And not saying, we're going to see tracks like that. But, remember, Katrina in 2005, came across, did something like that, and it entered that warm eddy and rapidly intensified in that very warm environment that was out in that region. So, again, just certainly something to pay attention to, especially the latter part of the season. If you get any storms that develop down here and they move across here, or storms that kind of come up like that, it definitely could have some impacts. And that is just kind of what we're making aware at this point. As for what would be Tropical Storm Bill, again, this is kind of just sitting in a fairly low upper ocean heat content environment. And again, we'll be moving into less upper ocean heat content. So again, really the only effects to land at this point that this is going to bring is mainly for some gusty winds, maybe some heavy rainfall to the extreme outer banks. Otherwise than that, this is pretty much now moving away and shouldn't be much of a land concern over the next couple of days. Now, where we have our next tropical wave that is now emerging off of Africa down here in this environment, upper ocean heat content values are marginal, but they are certainly there. And this kind of outlines the area of upper ocean heat content that is like most favorable right now for tropical cyclone development and activity. And again, where this tropical wave is kind of coming off on down here, it is sitting in a fairly decent upper ocean heat content environment, and we'll be kind of tracking along this area, and then eventually it will start to gain latitude and enter unfavorable conditions out in here. The Lesser Antilles will have to watch. This is not certainly something that's going to be posing a major threat, but it is something to watch as, again, even a tropical wave can bring some gusty winds and heavy rainfall to the area. So just because it may not be, tropical depression or storm by that time, and I'm not really expecting that, I'll talk why here in a moment. But again, could bring some adverse conditions, at least in the way of sensible weather, gusty winds, heavy rainfall to the Lesser Antilles over the next several days. So we'll talk about that here in a moment. Looking at the track here for Tropical Depression 2, again, sustained winds right now, 35 miles per hour, pressure of 1,006 millibars, moving toward the northeast at 21. So it is rapidly getting on out of here. This is expected to intensify into a modest tropical storm here at 50 miles per hour. And then by 36 hours from now, this becomes subtropical up here. So this is actually a subtropical storm at this point in the cooler waters. And then it will just kind of fade away out like that. So again, land impacts, again, this is now beginning to move away. So not really seeing any concerns with that. If we take a look here at the visible satellite loop, we can actually see that we've had in recent hours a lot of the convection being sheared away to the northeast, and our surface cyclone down here is actually exposed at the moment. And again, you can kind of see that it's not typical in the sense that you have a very well-defined low-level center and, spiral bands, wrapping around like that. A lot of the convection is on the west and northern side here of the system, and it's getting sheared away. So further intensification is going to be minimal, but we could definitely still see some. The diurnal cycle will probably help this a little bit in the warm Gulf Stream. But again, now for the most part, clear weather out here for the coastal Carolinas. And you could still see some shower and thunderstorm activity braze by. But again, by the most part, this is now moving well away now from any land concerns. And in the Gulf of Mexico, Invest Area 92L. Again, this having a 70% chance of development over the next couple of days. And again, this disturbed weather has been kind of sitting down here for the last several days, not really moving anywhere, but we are beginning to see this now slowly move northward, and this will be a very slow moving process. And again, it won't be until this weekend until we actually get a storm or depression somewhere out here in the central and northern Gulf of Mexico. So again, it's going to take a lot of time for this to actually evolve, and there are still details that are pretty murky at this point, as we are still talking about a couple of days in advance. So it is still a fairly murky idea at this point, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. The visible satellite shot here for 92L, again, disorganized shower and thunderstorm activity, broad circulation associated with this monsoonal Central American gyre. Again, a very broad circulation. We did have an area that tried to tighten up the other day, or really yesterday, across this area, and I believe that has now rotated inland across Mexico, and eventually this will kind of rotate back up. Now, what we do have to watch here, if we go back to the wider shot, this tropical wave right here that is now in the Western Caribbean, or in the Eastern Caribbean, this will begin to move towards the west over the next several days, and this will interact with this broader system. And because of that, this actually may be the piece that ends up kind of consolidating north across here and developing somewhere in this area. and that's where we're going to have to watch. So a key player is, does this tropical wave kind of maintain its identity as it moves westward? And then does it get slingshotted around this broader gyre and start developing up in here with this bigger monsoon trough that will be lifting northward, this monsoonal gyre that will be moving northward over the next couple of days? And that seems to be kind of the general consensus. Again, this is the area for development. So really anywhere from Texas to Louisiana, even the Florida Panhandle does have to watch for development chances here and the potential for impacts to a wider and broader perspective here. And then looking finally at our last disturbance in the tropical Atlantic, this is disturbance number 3, which could become Invest Area 94L within the matter of a day or two. Again, 20% over the next 5 days, and I do think that development chance will increase for reasons that I'll explain here in a moment. Again, this is expected to be moving off towards the west-northwest in a very slow moving area of trade winds across here, and with some fairly decent upper ocean heat content and also sea surface temperatures, this should have a shot to go on to develop at least into a brief tropical depression or storm. And it is possible that we do get a brief tropical storm out here sometime by early to midweek. So it will be very interesting to see what happens here. Currently, the visible satellite loop here on this tropical wave, we do notice that we do have some serious outflow that is kind of expanding on this quadrant. And what this means is that the wind shear across this area, especially really across the south, is not very strong. And because of that, we've seen outflow be able to expand on the southern side of this and kind of the southwestern side of it. And we also kind of do have some of that outflow trying to develop and spread kind of across here. We have pretty strong upper level winds that are cutting across here at this point, and that may actually help to increase outflow as the storm kind of gets closer. You may get some of that wind shear to kind of expand that outflow a little bit, especially up here. But by and large, again, this is a very big tropical wave. And we typically do not see tropical waves this time of the year that are this big and this well consolidated. And what we notice is that, yes, there is in fact a broad area of turning, kind of, rocking this kind of back and forth. And you can see that we do have a broader area of mid-level vorticity that is trying to develop south of the Cabo Verde Islands, which is right here. And over the next couple of days, this will be traversing over some pretty favorable environment before kind of turning up here. And then this is where you can see the cooler sea surface temperatures noted by some of these cumulus clouds out here, kind of fair weather cumulus and stuff like that. These are cold, these are basically with that cold air advection and just cooler sea surface temperatures and stronger upper level winds cutting across this area, which will likely hinder significant development after late week. Now, if we look here on the GFS forecast, we'll start off here by looking at the Western Atlantic, since this is kind of the closest to land impacts right now for 92L. Real quickly, this is Tropical Depression 2 out here again. This will be moving northeast, so I'm not really going to cover that because this is really not a land concern over the next couple of days. But if we look here at Invest Area 92L, again, this is the GFS run, the 12Z run valid for 2 p.m. this afternoon. We notice that there is, yes, indeed, a broad area of turning in the atmosphere down here, and that kind of is fairly evident within the looking here of the visible. We definitely see that, yeah, there is some broad circulation across this area. This larger cyclonic turning in the atmosphere will slowly move northward, and the GFS is kind of indicating that, how it slowly consolidates. Now, we still may have something actually try to form down here. By Tuesday, we may have something try to loosely form down here before kind of moving into Mexico. It is possible that that happens. And if we look here at the GFS forecasted sounding for this type of environment, if we can kind of get a look at that. So the forecast sounding here does show a little bit of shear, about 18 knots here of shear. We have a very high relative humidity profile that is saturated throughout the entire column here. There's really no dry air. And that's why these decate values are only about 191, which does not support a lot of dry air coming down into the lower part of the atmosphere. And the precipitable water amounts are right around 2.5 inches, so some fairly decent precipitable water content. Now, the wind shear is going to be the biggest thing. You can definitely see that we do have some shear. We basically have southerly winds that kind of back here, and then they change and reverse at about 200 millibars. Really after about 400 millibars, they start to reverse significantly. And that's why, again, whatever does develop in that area would probably be a very brief, short-lived system. Now, what ends up happening afterwards, though, is again, this tropical wave that is kind of down here at the moment, you kind of really don't see it there, but that energy somewhat does kind of come over here. And by Friday morning, we're looking at this larger gyre that's moving northward into the central Gulf of Mexico. Again, still bringing a lot of rainfall to portions of Central America and the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. But here's now where we're starting to see consolidation occur on the GFS forecast in the central Gulf of Mexico. And eventually, again, this kind of just rotates around and becomes a very large gyre and a very large system. Now, again, whether this might be a subtropical or tropical system or, purely tropical, again, remains to be seen. And here's our tropical wave, which we'll cover here in a moment. But again, we can definitely tell that now if we can definitely tell that there is an organization that will increase. Now, if we look here at the relative humidity in the middle part of the atmosphere, what we're really looking for here is you'll notice that this is by Saturday morning. And again, this is on June 19th. This is Saturday morning. And we do have this dry air that's getting entrained into the backside of the circulation again. And if we kind of look here at what we might be expecting, the environment in this atmosphere is strongly sheared, about 24 knots of shear. And notice that we have decay values that are now of 636 with a relative humidity of only 62%. This indicates that there is dry air aloft, in that with decay values approaching closer to 700, that means that dry air will be more easily transported down to the surface with any thunderstorms that end up developing in this environment. And we also notice that the east side is the one that's going to be getting all the impacts from this. And that's typical for this time of the year. We get a very sloppy, disorganized mess that occurs usually in the Gulf of Mexico, because we still have some pretty strong upper level winds that kind of cut across that area. But we also notice that this very dry air will get entrained into the circulation and end up pushing everything really off to the side and making the center devoid of convection. Now, this is 1,003 millibars, and if we look here at the 10-meter winds here, what we'll notice is that we do have, again, a somewhat tropical, storm force winds, 30, 40 knots that are piling onshore in Louisiana. And again, given the fact that this area is very susceptible and prone to storm surge problems, I do suspect that there will be some storm surge problems, at least 1 to 3 feet of inundation that is possible above normally dry ground. And that will be something, of course, that you cannot take for granted. So certainly if you're in an evacuation zone or a flood-prone area, you need to be paying attention to this. If you live right along the coast, you do need to be paying attention to this, because whether this is a 30-mile-per-hour tropical depression or whether this is a 45, 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm, the impacts are largely going to remain the same. I don't expect wind to be the main impact here. But eventually, this kind of just moves finally to the northeast as a big, Bermuda high sets up across here. And we start to get kind of that flow regime out of here. And this kind of just moves inland and dissipates at that time. And a new tropical wave here, this is the one that we were monitoring earlier, all the way from the coast of Africa now, will be moving through the Lesser Antilles by Sunday, according to the GFS forecast, and maybe bringing some inclement weather. Nothing more than that, I do suspect. So we'll go ahead and back this all up now. We'll go ahead and back it up to the start, and now we'll take a look here at the tropical Atlantic, and we'll kind of take a look at everything now. So this is the GFS forecast, 2 p.m. this afternoon, 850 vorticity. And again, what we're looking at here is this broad area of disturbance right here. This is really far south at this point, at only about 6 to 7 north. And it is sitting very far to the south for this time of the year, with the intertropical convergence zone being very suppressed. Now, what we'll notice is that, again, this is in a fairly decent environment, and eventually we start to get this area to tighten up here by Wednesday afternoon. This is only within 54 hours from now. This becomes a bona fide tropical cyclone in the main development region at a fairly low latitude. This is still about 10 north. And eventually, this even becomes a stronger cyclone here. This does try to develop into a decent little broad, or not really broad, a consolidated vortex out here by Thursday. This is Thursday morning at 8 a.m. Now, eventually what happens is that this cyclone eventually kind of fades away here. This is by hour 132 by 0Z Sunday, so this is really by 8 p.m. Saturday night. This tropical wave now gets absorbed with a lot of dry air. You can see that big high pressure out here, which will be pumping in a lot of dry air kind of around that. And because of that, what will likely end up happening is a lot of dry air will be entrained, a lot of strong vertical wind shear, and all that will be left for the Lesser Antilles by Sunday afternoon will just be a fast-moving tropical wave. That is usually what you guys get for this time of the year. Now, eventually, the GFS does try to develop another system down here in June again, and at a fairly low latitude. So we'll see if the GFS kind of picks up on that and can, basically if it remains the same. Now, looking at the relative humidity again in the middle part of the atmosphere, this tropical wave is very well insulated from any dry air to the north. And again, the immediate air to the north is not really that dry. Now, relative humidity values to the north here are a little bit drier, and we'll kind of be able to tell that the relative humidity is only about 54%, and there is a lot of dry air that quickly tapers off after you get just above the surface, and then eventually it moistens back up again, and then dries back out, and then moistens back up. So it's this very weird kind of profile here on the SKU-T. Now, again, with DK values only at 288, you might be like, well, that's somewhat of a moist environment. Yeah, it's moist because of right here. Again, you kind of would moisten that up, and you'd probably end up losing a lot of dry air transplant down in this part of the atmosphere. But again, this right here, a very sharp temperature inversion too, not really conducive for tropical cyclone development out there. If we look here at the relative environment, though, right near where our system is by, this is by 2 a.m. tomorrow, what we'll notice is that our relative humidity has now jumped to about 86%, and the DK values are only about 300. It's a fairly moist profile. There is a little bit of dry air just above the surface here, but other than that, there's a fairly moist profile throughout the entire column. And because of that, and because that, again, we don't really have that sharp of a temperature inversion, we do have thunderstorms that pop up in this environment, and they are fairly robust and they stay together. And because this tropical wave moved off of Africa last night, it also got a boost from the diurnal cycle from land. And then tonight it will get a diurnal cycle from the ocean, which should also help this begin to fester up more thunderstorm activity. Now, eventually here, this is by about 8 a.m. Wednesday morning. Again, here is our tropical, at this point it would be a tropical cyclone, tropical depression, or storm in this environment. Very weak surface, only about 1,011 millibars, so it's not very deep. It's not like 992, but it is an area of vorticity. And again, just looking real quickly at that area of vorticity, there it is there. And if we go back to the relative humidity, what we'll notice is that here, now here's the dry air to the north. This is the dry air that will start to be entrained into the system later in the week. And again, our system right now is still sitting in a fairly moist bubble. And if we look here at the, sounding in this environment, what we'll notice is that the relative humidity values are at about 79%. So they have come down a little bit, but they are still very high. And the shear values are only about 5 knots. So you can see that there is pretty uniform shear profiles throughout the entire part of the atmosphere. Just a little bit of changing, but not dramatically. Not dramatically so. The only real shear you get is in the form of speed shear up here in the part of the atmosphere. But by and large, what we kind of end up having is a very moist profile through the column. Again, DK value is now at about 232, so a pretty favorable moist environment with relatively low shear. But eventually here by Friday, what we'll notice is that now we're beginning to feel effects of the strong Bermuda Azores high that is now beginning to rapidly funnel in this dry air around the system. And if we take a look here at the sounding for this time, really by Friday, by 2 a.m. here, what we'll notice is that now we've started to really kill the relative humidity, now down to 65%, and the DK values are now up to about 500, so they're almost about 550. And because of that, you notice all this dry air in the middle part of the atmosphere, something that we would look for in almost like a severe weather sounding, basically. So not really going to be seeing much in the window of favorability at this point, because now we've got a lot of dry air that's going to be transplanted down to the surface with thunderstorms that develop. And eventually, pretty strong upper level winds really will be the demise of this. Again, this is by 2 a.m. Saturday. And again, just the sounding across this area shows, again, that we've started to pick up shear now in terms of about 19 knots of shear. The wind direction has changed with height, and the relative humidity now down to 62%, and the DK value is now up to almost 600. So moisture is going to be very limited. Increased vertical wind shear should start to kill this off here by Saturday. And eventually, as it's moved through the islands, you can see just a little bit of flare up there. I'm not really expecting much development after that point in time. Now, conversely here, the European model, again, does develop our system into a bona fide tropical storm. This is Invest Area 92L here by about 12Z Saturday, June 19th. And this would be making landfall somewhere across really the western part of Louisiana, kind of where we've seen systems, go last year, unfortunately. And then eventually that kind of just moves on out and then becomes a fairly strong upper level system that could bring a lot of rainfall, maybe even some severe weather out here over the next couple of days. And then our main development region system, the Euro doesn't even really pick up on that at all. In fact, the Euro just shows a very weak convergence field, which is the intertropical convergence zone. Now, we look here at the GFS ensemble, or I'm sorry, this is the European ensembles, and we'll look at the GFS ensembles, but this is the European ensembles for the 0Z run. Again, not really mentioning anything out here, but does show 92L over here, again, making landfall somewhere across Texas and Louisiana. And if we look here at the GFS, what we'll notice is that, yes, the GFS does indeed have a tropical disturbance that does end up forming down there. Now, not a very strong system, but you can definitely tell that, yes, we do have something there. And then maybe we'll have to watch for some redevelopment of 92L out here in the Gulf Stream if, in fact, that's where it kind of ends up going. So it'll be a very interesting couple of days that we're going to have to be watching everything again. I'm going to be staying on top of everything here and bringing updates as consistently and frequently as I possibly can. All right. With that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I am Michael Ramelli. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.